am very pleased to be able to moderate this very distinguished panel of experts today. And before I introduce them, I want to just kind of give a little bit of background on what we're going to talk about during this panel discussion. Our focus is going to be on how various stakeholders are supporting the clean vehicle transition. We'll discuss the many opportunities and challenges that we face as we work toward our shared global climate goals. Globally, EV sales have achieved 10% market share last year. That has mainly been driven by the growth in China and Europe. In China, EVs made up 19% of total sales, and in Europe, EVs made up 11% of total sales, and if you add in hybrids, that number jumps to over 20%. The US is still way behind, but EV sales are climbing quickly. Last year, 6% of total sales, and that was up from the previous year where it was only about 3%. So today we're going to discuss how we can continue to increase the sale of EVs, ensure we have a sufficient supply chain to produce these vehicles, and how the government can assist in this transition, whether it's at the federal, state, or international level. So let me begin by introducing our panel of experts. I'm pleased to introduce Ambassador Stavros Lambrinidis, Ambassador of the European Union to the US, South Carolina Secretary of Commerce Harry Lightsey, Cody Lusk, President and CEO of the American International Automobile Dealers Association, and Jeff Werner, VP of Corporate and Government Affairs at Panasonic Corporation of North America. Thank you all so much for joining me today. We're going to start off by each of you providing some opening comments before we get into the question and answers. So, Mr. Ambassador, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Thank you. Great to be here. So I'm the EU Ambassador to the United States, and my job is to make sure that the two biggest open free economies in the world, the European Union and the United States, work together to boost our growth, our competitiveness domestically and around the world. And EVs is a huge area that we're now focusing on. Let us not forget why we're having this discussion, why we're trying to electrify our car fleets. The fact is that we are facing, and we've recognized that we are facing, an existential threat in climate change. Carbon emissions are contributing to this dramatically, and therefore they have to be cut. And as you said, Jennifer, you're absolutely right. We have a long way to go. So in Europe, we are close to 13% full EVs. When you just look at the plug-ins as well, close to 23%. In the US, it's slower, but getting up. But we have our work cut out for us. So the question is, can we achieve our goals? And I would say the first thing we have to do is we have to innovate and to support innovation of our companies. The second thing we have to do is to ensure open competition. In the end of the day, if we're going to be reaching our climate goals, we need to have consumers being able to select the car that they prefer from all the available options among countries that compete fairly and freely. And if we cut that off, then what you have is probably cars that cost more, and there are fewer in the market. So we basically undermine our capacity to meet our climate goals. Our goal is all electric new vehicles in the European Union market by 2035, 100%. The Biden administration has announced its goal by 2030, 50% of all new vehicles in this country electric. So finally, let me say, in this effort, governors have a huge role to play as well in standard setting. We have to be able to ensure that our supply chains, our value chains are open. We coordinate in things like electric vehicle charging. So if you're in the EU or in the US, it doesn't make a difference. You can have a vehicle and the range anxiety is not there, because unless we get our consumers on board, we're going to have trouble. So Inflation Reduction Act, let me close by this, although I suppose you may ask me again. Very supportive of its ambitions. Very concerned with some of its provisions that discriminate against European cars, and other provisions that deal with critical minerals and things that we all need in the cheapest, most open way. They deal with them in a way that actually restricts the capacity of the European and the US supply chain to work as one. And we set up a task force on this. It's been very effective up to now, including on some decisions that the US government has announced for leased vehicles, but we have a lot of work to do. And I'm glad to be here to be able to do it.
Thank you so much. Mr. Secretary.
Yeah, so South Carolina is an auto state. We have over 74,000 South Carolinians that work in one way, shape, or another in the automobile industry. And we're actually the leading state in terms of exports of finished automobiles outside of the United States. We also lead the country in terms of exports of tires from made in South Carolina to the rest of the world. So the automobile industry is certainly a very important industry to South Carolina, and this transformation is therefore very important to us. And interestingly, our governor convened an EV summit in early October of last year to talk about the transformation to EVs and what that might mean for our state. Shortly after that, in October, BMW, which has their largest production facility in the world, based in Greer, South Carolina, announced that it was going to invest $1.7 billion in that facility in order to begin to manufacture battery electric vehicles in Greer. Volvo, which manufactures vehicles in the lower part of our state outside of Charleston, had already announced that their facility is going to be the first facility in the United States to produce exclusively battery electric vehicles as they roll out their brand new EX90 battery electric SUV and the new Polestar 3 vehicle for the United States out of that facility. We also have Mercedes-Benz, which makes Sprinter vans for the U.S. market, and they'll be making a battery electric version of that. Proterra, which is a company that started in South Carolina, makes battery electric transit buses. And Oshkosh Defense will be producing the next generation postal delivery vehicle, which will be both a battery electric version as well as a internal combustion engine version out of Spartanburg, South Carolina. So this is a very important transformation to the state. We're working very hard to support our manufacturers as they make this transformation so that they can grow and thrive and succeed in this new world.
Thank you very much. Cody.
Yes, I represent, is this on?
No.
Is this on? Can we hear me now? Okay. I represent the 9,600 international nameplate franchises here in the U.S. Many, but not all, of the vehicles you see here that my members sell and service, and also their 500,000 American employees. I can say that as a whole, auto dealers are very excited about how we head into this transformation to the future and an electrified future. We may have some hurdles and hiccups along the way that we might get into, but I also want to take a moment to, those of you that remember that have been coming to this show for a long time, Wanata was one of the first people to have an electric vehicle superhighway. So they wanted to showcase to dealers and consumers, this is happening in auto shows all across the country, what exciting things are coming in the future, what customers have a chance to look forward to, and what the opportunities provide. So we appreciate that and look forward to talking more about that coming day.
Thank you. Jeff.
Thanks, Jennifer. I think those can use this as well. And my name is Jeff Werner with Panasonic, and I'm really pleased with the premise of the panel and to be on here. It's a real honor. Because of the role government has and in cooperation with industry towards making this transition happen and happen smoothly. Maybe I just need to set the stage a little bit of why Panasonic's sitting up here. I think it's not often well understood, but we are currently about 90% of the EV battery manufacturing capacity in the United States, and that's currently in Reno, Nevada, where we have about 38 gigawatts of production of EV batteries, which equates to about 56 cells a second and 2 billion cells a year. And this is just scratching the surface of what is needed currently and what will be needed in the very near future. We've also just announced a massive investment in Kansas. We've already broken ground. That will be another 32 gigawatts of production in Kansas. This will be a multi-customer facility. So as there's, Panasonic's famous for a lot of things, but I think it's not well known that we are becoming a leading EV battery manufacturing company. And we are very much at the sort of the tip of the spear on the electrification of the transportation sector. And as a company, I can say we're being very excited about what we're seeing currently, the demand signals we're getting, And I think it's the beginning of a real exciting transformation. And I think having these discussions is going to help smooth that transition.
Thank you so much. I'm going to jump right into it because we have limited time and there's so much that we could discuss. I did want to spend the bulk of our time talking about the Inflation Reduction Act, obviously, because we're talking about what can government and other stakeholders do together to help us with this transition. And of course, the recently passed Inflation Reduction Act is a key piece of what is happening in this country right now. And Mr. Ambassador, I want to start with you, if I could. You know, some of our closest allies, the EU, Japan, Korea, have all raised concerns about the Inflation Reduction Act, you know, mainly because of the North America final assembly requirement, because of where the sourcing can come from for cars to be eligible, and also concern over the green subsidies that are offered in the Inflation Reduction Act and what that could mean for maybe perhaps more industries, more companies moving here to the U.S. to take advantage of that. And I know that talks have been ongoing between the EU, certainly all three countries, and with the U.S. government to see if something can be done to kind of allay some of those concerns. What is your perspective on the Inflation Reduction Act, and can you provide us with any updates on the ongoing discussions that are occurring right now over in the EU about providing your own green subsidies?
So I'm enthusiastic about the goals of the Inflation Reduction Act. We in Europe have been moving in that direction in terms of innovation, production of green technologies, including EVs, for a very long time. And it's great to be joined by the US because both of us together can make the huge difference. I am concerned about the discriminatory provision in the Act, the ones that explicitly exclude European-made vehicles from the incentives, which means that the US consumer, in the end of the day, will have much less choice in what they can buy in this country if a car assembled in the US only can receive $7,500 of incentives. And I am concerned not just because of the illegality of this, but fundamentally because I know for a fact, because we are doing it in Europe for a fact, that you can move to green without discriminating against other companies. For those of you who don't know, in a country like Germany, BMW, you know, Mercedes, Audi, Volkswagen, the biggest seller of EVs today is Tesla. And that is because the European Union has incentives, in fact, to ensure that consumers buy EVs and that producers can make them efficiently, but we do not apply them only to European cars or cars assembled in the EU. And that has allowed a company like Tesla, or batteries being made only in the EU and all those things, or critical minerals and all those things, that has allowed Tesla to be able to compete very effectively. That is also making sure that our companies in Europe become better in innovation and production. And that means, at the end of the day, lower prices, higher quality cars, consumer choice, and moving much faster than anyone thought towards that zero emission economy that we want to achieve. So that's my concern. We in Europe are, as you mentioned, applying our own laws and regulations and incentives as we speak, not just the ones that exist, but more, to promote a tech and a green transition in our economies. And you will see more of that unfolding. But I do have to say one thing, and I have to stress this. We're going to be putting billions and billions in this business, as is the US. The biggest mistake that governments can do is to get into a subsidy war, into trying to ensure that I can give more money to someone to stay here and produce as opposed to going somewhere else. That's a danger because the IRA, the way it's structured, in a sense, is endangering investment in Europe. It is sucking away investment potentially, especially at the time of very high energy prices, away from Europe, weakening the European economy. Nothing can be worse for the strength of the US economy or US companies than a weak European economy. We are the biggest economy in which US companies invest and make money. We're the biggest investors in this country by far than anyone else. So keeping the economies strong is important. Subsidies wars can take those billions, both on both sides of the Atlantic, and shrink them essentially into producing much less green output than if we looked at our markets as a unified supply chain, and if we supported that as opposed to breaking it up. So that's my emphasis. That's why I think that elements in the IRA are misguided, deeply misguided, and that's why we have set up Americans and Europeans task force as we speak at the very highest political level to address those issues. We've had progress in the case of leasing cars, but not in others. and we'll keep working on it, I hope, for the benefit of American consumers, the U.S. economy, and U.S. consumers in the EU economy as well.
Are those discussions continuing?
Yes, they are continuing. In the end of December, the U.S. announced its interpretation of the IRA to allow for vehicles that are being, commercial vehicles as it's called, that are being leased, to be able to benefit fully of the IRA tax incentives, no matter where they were made, and that's a very, very important thing. I think it's important as well, but industry people are probably better set than me to say this, and maybe I would like your view as well, because of the range anxiety and other issues and the EVs being a new thing, maybe leasing of EVs in the next few years is probably going to be the trend as opposed to buying them, although I'm not sure about this, I'm asking you, but that could be important. But like I said, many more issues there to discuss, including the assembly, including the batteries and the critical minerals, discrimination that I hope we find a solution to. And if we do, boy, I'm really hopeful, I really am, both the US and the EU, and for the future of the EV industry.
Yeah, you raise a good point of the concern potentially that's out there for other countries, for instance, putting restrictions on American-made vehicles, for instance, and receiving eligible credits.
We're not doing this, as I told you, which is why Tesla is doing so well. We don't want to do this, and I fully expect that we'll be able to find solutions in our discussions to ensure that we boost a value change as opposed to bringing them up.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mr. Secretary, I was going to ask you along those same lines. I mean, obviously for South Carolina, number one export for vehicles by value, number two in the country for EVs being exported. What would happen to South Carolina and these exports and the number of cars being made if other countries put similar type of restrictions on these vehicles?
Yeah, well, I can't really speculate on that. I mean, our job and what we look at is our role is to support the businesses that are in South Carolina grow and thrive and succeed. And to some extent, that means getting the right assets in place to support their businesses as we go forward. So, for example, after BMW announced their investment in Greer, we're very happy to announce that Envision AESC, which is another Japanese battery manufacturer, is going to locate a major facility in Florence, South Carolina, and invest close to $1 billion and create close to 2,000 jobs for South Carolinians. And then in December, we also announced Redwood Materials, which has a facility close to Panasonic's facility in Nevada. They're going to invest $3.5 billion and open a major facility on the East Coast outside of Charleston, South Carolina. And they have a great business model as we look at this. They recycle lithium-ion batteries. And so they take old lithium-ion batteries and through a variety of processes produce anode and cathode materials that can be used again to produce virgin batteries. And because they reprocess those materials, they qualify under the IRA as being produced in the United States. So it's really like having a cobalt, a nickel, a lithium, and a copper mine, a whole new mine created in the United States for those critical components. And it keeps those components out of the landfills. It creates a circular supply chain, which is very important for our OEMs. It produces a source of zero carbon materials for the battery manufacturers. So, those are the kind of things that we're doing to support our companies in South Carolina.
Very impressive, and there's no question, I think, that your state is a leader in that, and certainly encouraging the OEMs and suppliers to make this transition. And you raise an excellent point on the recycling end of things. That's a whole nother topic that we could talk about, but it's critically important. Cody, I did want to turn to you because, obviously, a big piece of this is the consumer. Of course, right? And consumers are more and more interested in EVs these days. They want to learn more about them. They want to try them out, right? But I think the Inflation Reduction Act is pretty confusing, right? I spend a lot of time myself focused on it, and I find it confusing. And I think it changes, right, as far as what vehicles are eligible and in what point of time they're going to be eligible. I mean, for instance, I think there are approximately over 70 EV models available to consumers. But right now, only 22, I think, are eligible to receive some of the credit. And in a few months, that number could change again. So how are the dealers understanding all of this, and how are they helping consumers understand it?
Well, I think a couple of points that you make, and then I want to address what the ambassador had to say about leasing. But first and foremost, you have, and I'm glad you mentioned confused, because I had two of my board of directors on the cover of Automotive News this week, and the headline said, "Totally confused." And it was talking about how dealers are grasping with this, and everybody, it isn't just us, it's them dealing with their manufacturers, with the finance companies, trying to get details that we can provide, because consumers, when this came out, consumers thinks there's this EV pot of gold, and they get their $7,500 and they can apply it, and this stuff is out there, and the reality is it is, most of the experts, as we've heard all these panels talk about, it is so confusing. Now, you layer this on the fact that we're coming out of basically 2 years where we had a supply issue, where supply was very constrained. We're coming out of that, combined with inflationary pressure, interest rates increasing. The biggest issue facing the industry right now is affordability. I'm not just talking EVs, I'm talking everything. The average transaction price of a vehicle last month was close to $50,000. So you add that on to what used to be way out there with the 60-month payment. Now people are looking at 84-month payments at the interest rates they are today. And you start doing the math, when an EV purchase is a lot of times 30 to 35% more on top of that, it gets even more confusing and hard to make that sale. You mentioned leasing, Mr. Ambassador, and yeah, I think we were all excited to hear that might be a part of it, but we're all waiting to see, because in the lease part of it, on the commercial side, it's not like the consumer comes in and they do the deal and then you take $7,500 off of that. It's baked into whatever the finance company or the lease company wants to do, so they're not necessarily seeing that. But I do see that usually with higher end price vehicles in years past, you do start with leasing and it becomes a very popular thing. But Jennifer, you mentioned all those vehicles. Those aren't all available in every market. I mean, you go online and you start looking at certain BEVs that are coming out and you get all excited, and then you see the fine print that they're only available in 10 states. So there could be customers in Virginia that can't get what they want. There could be customers in other places. So there's a supply issue as it relates to this too that's very frustrating, because a customer can't understand in Virginia if they want to buy something that's only available in New Jersey or someplace like that. So there's a real educational issue that comes out that I think it puts some of the salespeople, some of the dealers in a tough situation when they're trying to explain what vehicles are SUVs by certain standards and which ones aren't according to this. And so we're all hoping that we can work in partnership with the government to make this a little less confusing, but we'll see.
No question about that. Jeff, you mentioned earlier, certainly the new facility that you all have in Kansas. Obviously, you've had one for some time in Nevada, building these batteries that are desperately needed. And that is obviously pretty significant. And so from your perspective, I'm interested in the Inflation Reduction Act, the incentives, right, that are available for battery manufacturers, for other suppliers to do more here in the U.S. How has that changed the calculus for your company, for others in similarly situated, to be able to do more, to build more here in the U.S.?
So I think it's in a very basic sense, it's critical, right? What the IRA has done is bring an increased level of certainty to the market and to the investments, which are massive capital investments. I mean, what the announcement we made in Kansas is a $4 billion investment. So when you have that additional security and certainty, that certainly helps. But I think what is most, when we talk about the incentives for the larger supply chain, is what's really critical for a battery manufacturer like Panasonic, and ultimately our customers, the OEMs, is the full line of the supply chain, right? So it's not just the cell makers, it's It's the redwood materials, which is a critical, getting into the sustainability component, which is as well, all the way up to extraction, through having this, what the ambassador called a unified supply chain. And as we are scaling up, and we already have a massive facility, and we're looking at, we've made the decision as a company to have the United States as a major component of our manufacturing base. Having access to the inputs is going to be critical. And I think that gets to things like what we're talking about and some of the discriminatory aspects of this. We need a unified supply chain that treats our allies like our allies, right? And allows for inputs coming in as the supply chain is stood up here, but just in general having, we have very complicated global supply chains that need to feed this new business. So, getting back to the original question, I think without the IRA, we were still moving forward, and we had made the decision to be here. What this does is it allows us to be a little bit more aggressive and pull things forward, and create the certainty that we need.
We only have a few minutes left, and so I think I'm curious in getting each of your perspective on what additional things can be done, right, with regard to coordination between the OEMs, the suppliers, government, dealers, everybody as a whole, right? What can we be doing now and going forward to kind of improve the availability of these vehicles for consumers, help consumers understand and be able to purchase these vehicles? Mr. Ambassador, any thoughts on that?
Many, but I'll just focus on one, which is the charging infrastructure. I think one of the things that we're doing now in the Trade and Technology Council, as we call it, which is the platform where Americans and Europeans talk together, basically about setting the rules of the 21st century economy together, is looking at whether or not we can set the standards in some ways. We can agree on standards that deal with charging, and that is going to be huge if you're going to build consumer confidence in EVs. People have to feel that they are out there and they can actually have the car, and they can charge it easily and in a way that is compatible, in different markets. Now I understand. I mean, you guys can tell me better than I do. I asked someone, can I buy an EV in the States when I'm done with this job and take it back to Europe? And the answer was, well, I'm not sure. Maybe you need to change something here. Maybe you need something there. I mean, give me a break.
Tweaks, yeah.
Give me a break. It's just, I mean, this is the kind of stuff that governments can do well if they sit down and do it right. And setting the standards for all these new technologies, not just EVs, all these green technologies, is going to be absolutely huge in the future. It has to do with making sure consumers are confident around the world, but it also has to do with making sure that others don't set them for us. Because I assure you there are others out there that are trying to do the same thing. So we have to be smart and we have to be fast, and that requires an alliance that is strong. And strong alliances are based on strong allies, fundamentally. And so I am focused on making sure that the U.S. economy remains strong and gets stronger. That's good for Europe, for my companies. And I am pretty sure that the U.S. Should also be focused on ensuring that the EU economy is strong, gets stronger, because that's good for the U.S.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary.
Yeah, so just a couple of things. At the conclusion of the EV Summit last October, our governor signed an executive order, and he created a couple of things in that executive order. First of all, a task force under the supervision of the Department of Transportation to study our charging infrastructure and to make sure that we encourage and do everything we can to have adequate charging resources throughout the state, in the rural areas and the more distressed economically areas of the state, as well as in the urban areas of the state. He also set up an EV coordinator role under my department, the Department of Commerce, to pull together resources throughout the state government to make those resources available to our citizens, stand up a website that has all of our EV resources available to our citizens in one place. And we're also very focused on our workforce. As I said, we have 74,000 South Carolinians working in this industry, and we want to make sure that as these companies make this transformation, that the workforce in the state has the skills that they need in order for them to grow and be successful.
Absolutely. Cody and Jeff, real quick thoughts.
It needs to be easy, as they talked about. It needs to be competitive because the consumer benefits from competition, as we talked about, and it has to be affordable. Those are the three things.
Be really quick. Just we continue to focus on the supply chain, and I'll put in another plug for the Ambassador's unified supply chain. We need global inputs, we need domestic sources, and we need the recycling as well. So that's going to be key.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. We are out of time.
Thank you for
I'm
that.
sorry to
May I
say.
just say one thing? I'll take just half a minute. So I was in South Carolina last year.
Yeah.
Visiting the governor. It was a fantastic meeting. That's where we met as well. And I went to the BMW plant. I don't know if you guys can actually go in there. I'm the ambassador, so sometimes doors open easier for me than for others. But they took me around. It was quite interesting. And in the end of the line, I realized there's this thing that they have, this tradition that visiting dignitaries take a huge hammer, and they hammer the BMW thingy, seal in the front of the car. And they gave me the hammer, and they said, "Oh, please do it." And I hesitated for a few minutes, and then I thought, if I just miss by even just half an inch, this is about, what, $100,000 or something of damage? So I said, "Thank you very much. I'll just take a picture holding the hammer," which is what I did. But it's quite an amazing thing to go visit the sites where those cars are made. And I think EVs is going to be as exciting as anything for people, consumers as well, to see, how the product is being cooked. I mean, if you understand that, maybe you can actually love it and want to buy it more.
Thank you so much for that. All right, everyone, please help me thank our panel. And it is my pleasure to introduce our next panel, and Dave Shepardson with Reuters will be leading that.